If you've been following along, my spring travels along the eastern region of the United States has resulted in photographing a lot of waterfalls. And I recently spent 4 days photographing this absolutely magical corridor of waterfalls in central Pennsylvania.
It's been a year now, maybe longer, since she felt the sunshine on her long hair, and she still got salt in her old sneakers.
In this week's episode, we'll be exploring this area and talking about why you cannot leave home without a polarizer as a landscape photographer, especially for waterfall photography. I spent the entire first day scouting the area, and while I did bring my camera with me, I didn't take any photos and instead prioritized exploring the area to see every waterfall and get a sense of which ones would be viable photo options in the coming days. And let me tell you, there are a lot of waterfalls here. I track myself every day, so if you'd be interested in following along to see where I photograph most often, you can find that under the supporter tier of my Patreon link down below.
Just to remind her that she used to have adventures. When she's in an office, sending correspondence to the queens of Sheba in their LA apartments. And she is her
I ended up stopping at the largest falls in the area, mostly to cool down as there's always a nice breeze coming from the energetic 100-foot drop of water. So what does a polarizer do exactly, and why is it so important to a photographer's kit? To put it simply, it allows the photographer to manage and control reflections on surfaces such as water, but also enhance colors and contrast in your foliage, and even cut out atmospheric haze in the sky. It's an incredibly versatile tool that cannot be replicated in post-processing. While I did take my camera out to snap a few photos, they didn't turn out because of the harsh light which plagued the majority of my afternoon shooting. However, I did take a fun image of myself, and while it won't end up in my portfolio, it's a nice reminder that sometimes adding a human element to your shot can turn nothing into something.
slow and synthetic. She wants that rush, but she can't figure where to get it. She thinks
While any polarizer will suffice, you'll notice the one I'm using here is magnetic. I've used everything from screw-on filters, square filter systems, and magnetic is by far my preferred filter system choice. It allows you to stack filters like I am here with a 3-stop ND, and switch filters between lenses really easily. The kit I'm using here is made by Maven, and they're currently my favorite filter system. Not only are their magnets more secure than any other magnetic system I've used, they've innovated filters in a really smart way with color-colored rings, lens caps with 50% gray on the inside of them to set proper white balance, and they've even made this wonderfully 3D printed case. These will be linked down below if you're interested, but regardless of what system you choose, the polarizer should be your first filter, and you'll see exactly why in this video. I follow a pretty minimalist mindset when it comes to photography equipment, or just life in general, considering everything I own happens to be on a home on wheels. And no matter how small I pack down, I always bring a polarizer. I even brought one with me to my 7-week backpacking trip in Europe a few years ago. The next spot that caught my eye was an absolutely wonderful composition. I sat on this rock playing around with how the waterfall balanced and presented itself within the shot. You'll notice how different the composition is from standing height to sitting. Standing puts more space in between the waterfall here and here, but sitting turns a somewhat flat composition into a more 3D presentation by adding depth and filling the frame with more of the waterfall. Times like this, I'll just sit around and wait for the light to change if there's enough cloud coverage, but ultimately the light never really got any better. Thankfully, I spent a couple days here, so I was able to come back to the shot at a later date.
what's this life if I'm not brave enough to live it? So she made a promise right there on Church Street to let the light in me stop living in the backseat. And in an instant, something was different. Her eyes inhaled and woke to see what she'd been missing.
Don't be fooled by the fact that I'm wearing pants and a jacket here, by the way. It was quite warm out, but after getting absolutely obliterated by flies on my day scouting, I knew I had to return with more protection. And while this trail is only a few miles down, I took time most of the days to allow myself to cool off, but more importantly, to just simply look for what I might have been missing as I walked by. I spent almost 6 hours here every day and walked past the same areas quite often. Yet I continually found new things to see by simply letting myself patiently look around.
What's this life if we're not brave enough to live it?
The next waterfall was one of my favorites from the previous scouting day, and it also happened to be one of the absolute furthest from the trailhead. Go figure. I took my time and I moved around the area trying to find a composition I was happy with. It's always good to try and be patient, like I said before. Take your time and just don't force things. They'll come to you, I promise. One thing to keep in mind when using a polarizer is that they typically also act as a one-stop ND filter, meaning they're going to bring your exposure down by a single stop. Many times for photographing waterfalls, this is helpful as I want a shutter speed between 1/5 of a second to half a second, but it might not be in other scenarios where you're trying to capture as much light as possible, so just keep this in mind for your next outing. Polarizers are honestly kind of like magic when shooting waterfall and foliage. Notice as I rotate the polarizer in this scene how it cuts out the reflections on the rocks, which completely changes the dynamics, saturation, and contrast of that area. Now take a look at its effect on the entire scene. The first thing you're going to notice is reflections in the water, but also pay close attention to the foliage and leaves. It's as if I'm adjusting a slider in Lightroom to bring back detail into the scene, and the results should speak for themselves, and this is a prime example of why you must have a polarizer when shooting waterfalls. So after scouting and letting myself absorb the area, my favorite spot here happened to be under part of the waterfall. It created a bit of depth in the right side of the frame and top of the frame using the cave that I was in, and it turned out to be my favorite shot of the day. Like most of the day though, I never really got the light that I wanted, but I still came away with a shot or two that I enjoyed. Something to keep in mind when using a polarizer is that it will have varying results depending on how you position yourself between your subject and the sun. Typically, if your scene is facing away from the sun, you'll have great results. But if you're ever shooting in the direction of the sun, you won't be able to cut out as many reflections. If you're wondering if you need direct sunlight to utilize the polarizer, absolutely not. My second day here, I had a lot more cloud coverage, which resulted in much more diffuse light at times, which is exactly what I'm looking for when photographing waterfalls. Pay close attention to the foliage in this scene as I rotate the polarizer. It's as if the scene is coming to life when the polarizer is in full utilization, creating absolutely wonderful results. Keep in mind that if you're working with a very high contrast scene, unlike the one in here, you might not want to use the maximum amount of polarization. Sometimes polarizing to about 50 to 70% and leaving reflections on dark spots of the water or the rocks can help keep those areas from disappearing into darkness, but this will totally vary based on your scene and lighting situation. A great tip when using your polarizer is to make sure you're always rotating it counterclockwise or left when adjusting the polarization when you're behind the camera. If you're ever in front of the camera, you have to reverse this. This will ensure that you never accidentally loosen the filter from your lens. This works especially great with magnetic filters because it'll also never over tighten the filter because your only force on the actual filter ring is the magnetic force between the ring and the filter. If you need more examples of scenes that come to life with a polarizer, here are a few more other examples from my recent adventures. I hope you enjoyed my insights and thoughts on exactly why you should never leave home without this filter, which again you can find down below for the one that I'm using. As always, you can like this video if you liked it, subscribe if you loved it, and there's got to be some rainbows out there somewhere. Actually, fun fact, a polarizer can completely remove a rainbow from a scene, so don't use them when you're shooting rainbows. Anyways, I'll see you on the next one. Later.